There are 13 official classes in D&D 5e, and each class has a number of different subclasses that enhances and changes the way those classes function. However, there are some classes that have a lot to be desired, as the abilities and features might feel too niche or outright useless in some cases. While some subclasses are definitely more catered to certain types of campaigns than others, there are some subclasses that don't really bring much to the table to begin with, or take too much time and effort to really be worth taking to begin with, which is what the subject of today's video is going to be about. With that out of the way, let's get started. And starting this list off at number 10, we have the path of the Battlerager Barbarian. This Barbarian subclass allows you to fully weaponize a set of spiked armor in order to dish out punishment to creatures that dare set foot near you. At 3rd level, you're able to use your bonus action to make a melee weapon attack with your spiked armors, using your strength modifier for the attack and damage rolls of this attack, in order to dish out 1d4 piercing damage to a creature within 5 feet of you. Also, whenever you succeed at a grapple check against a creature with your attack action, the creature takes 3 piercing damage flat out. And at 6th level, you gain Reckless Abandon, which grants you temporary hit points equal to your Constitution modifier while you're raging and disappears once it ends. This feature helps provide a little bit of extra survivability. Meanwhile, at 10th level, you gain Battlerager Charge, which allows you to take a dash action as a bonus action, so as long as you're maintaining your rage. And last but not least, at 14th level, you gain Spike Retribution, which punishes creatures within 5 feet of you that make melee attacks against you to, while you're wearing spiked armor and are raging, take 3 piercing damage each time. At first glance, a lot of these features are really neat concepts on paper, but sort of lack substance compared to other subclasses. For instance, being able to use your bonus action to make an additional attack is always very good, since that's extra action economy your barbarian can use. However, only being a 1d4 plus your strength modifier damage that never goes up over the course of the campaign is kind of underwhelming, when another barbarian subclass, the Path of Berserker subclass, can make an additional weapon attack using their Great Axe as a bonus action while using their unique Frenzy feature, albeit at the cost of gaining levels of exhaustion when that frenzy ends. As for being able to damage enemies that you successfully grapple, 3 piercing damage isn't really that good, especially considering this damage is non-magical and more enemies you face will resist non-magical damage as you get further into a campaign. At that point, it's better to just make an attack instead of a grapple unless you were intended on grappling a creature in the first place. It doesn't really specify whether +1 and above spiked armor would make this piercing damage magical for the purposes of overcoming resistances, so that could just be left to your DM. And while your attack rolls made with the armor could be considered magical with +1 of the spiked armor, nothing really says that they would gain the +1 bonus to those attacks since it is magical armor, which only states that it gives you bonus AC. Again, this might be up to the DM's rule, and nothing really breaks if you're allowed to gain these benefits. Meanwhile, Reckless Abandon granting you temporary hit points equal to your Constitution modifier while you're raging sounds useful. There's the glaring flaw in the fact that these temporary hit points are too few to really matter. Even if you were to max out your Constitution via increases, you would only gain 5 temporary hit points at maximum for the entire duration of your rage. And once again, these temporary hit points don't increase or get better as you level up, so you'll find yourself losing those hit points as soon as you gain them anyway. While this might feel effective against melee attacks due to the natural resistance of bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, this basically does nothing against elemental attacks. And while it isn't that much better, the Path of the Storm Herald subclass allows you to pick the Tundra effect for your Storm Aura feature at 3rd level, which allows you to use your bonus action in order to give creatures of your choice within the 10-foot aura 2 temporary hit points, which scales up to 6 temporary hit points at 20th level. While the overall average of these temporary hit points are quite low, the fact that these temporary hit points can not only refresh every turn using your bonus action, but can also be granted to nearby allies makes this a much stronger feature than Reckless Abandon, a 6th level feature that doesn't refresh and never scales. As for Battlerager Charge, being able to use the dash action as a bonus action is actually extremely good and useful for barbarians, since they basically always want to be in melee range so they can maintain rage more easily and take hits for allies, which is kind of a shame when you consider this is a 10th level feat, while a rogue can do this and more at 2nd level. And since most campaigns often don't reach 17th level, you could very easily dip 2 levels into rogue if you really wanted to get a bonus action dash as soon as possible. However, the ability to dash as a bonus action baked into your subclass at all is still really good regardless. Spike Retribution kinda suffers the same problems as the grappled portion of the Battlerager armor feature, where the damage the creatures takes would be resisted pretty often. However, being a 14th level feature that only activates whenever you're hit by a melee attack, only dealing 3 damage back at the attacker feels extremely lackluster for what's supposed to be a subclass's capstone feature. There's also the caveat that this subclass is only available to dwarves, but it does specify that a DM may remove this restriction as needed, so it's not that much of a knock on the subclass itself. Overall, the Battlerager has a lot of neat features that feel way undertuned and leaves a lot to be desired. The biggest problem with this subclass is the lack of scaling with any of its features. Maybe if the damage of the bonus action attack, the grapple check portion, and the damage from spec retribution, as well as the temporary hit points granted by reckless abandon scaled over the course of the campaign at all, then maybe this subclass would feel more appealing. But as it stands, this subclass just doesn't really do all that much to be worth taking over the other barbarian subclasses, which is why Path of the Battlerager makes it on this list. And at number 9, we have the Inquisitive Rogue. This is a rogue subclass which allows you to root out secrets and unravel mysteries using your talents and unrivaled perception and investigation skills to figure out the true intentions of the creatures you come across. This subclass has a lot of flavorful features that are very fun in the right settings. Starting at 3rd level, you learn 3 separate features. The first is Ear of Deceit, which allows you to sniff out lies made by other creatures by treating any d20 roll that is 7 or lower as an 8 whenever you make an insight check to determine if someone is lying. The second feature you learn is Eye for Detail, which allows you to use your bonus action in order to make a perception check in order to spot hidden objects or creatures, or investigation check in order to decipher clues. Lastly, you gain the Insightful Fighting feature, allowing you to use your bonus action to make a contested insight check against a creature's deception check in order to allow you to make sneak attacks on that creature, regardless as if you have advantage or not if they fail, but only as long as you don't have disadvantage on that creature. This effect lasts for 1 minute or until you successfully use this feature against a different target. This feature is pretty solid due to the fact that it isn't tied to any sort of resource, so you can spam it as a bonus action every turn until it works. Moving on to the Inquisitive Rogue's 9th level feature, you gain the Steady Eye feature, allowing you to make perception checks and investigation checks while moving with advantage, so long as you move more than half your speed on the same turn. This basically means that, as long as you're moving at half speed, this feature should always be on outside of combat. But not only that, there's also a hidden bonus that this feature provides if you know how passive perception works. Basically, passive checks are determined by adding 10 to any given modifiers for that check. So if you have a +3 for your perception checks, then your passive perception is 13. However, the rules for passive checks also explain that if the character has advantage on the check, add 5. For disadvantage, subtract 5. This effectively means that as long as you never move more than half of your movement speed, you not only have advantage on your perception and investigation checks, you also gain a +5 bonus to your passive perception and investigation checks, which might even eliminate certain rolls altogether. Upon reaching 13th level, you gain the Unerring Eye feature, allowing you to use your action to gain a spidey sense-like ability whenever you're in the presence of illusions, shapechangers that aren't in their original form, and other forms of magic meant to deceive creatures within 30 feet of you, as long as you're not blinded or deafened. However, you only know that there is such an effect present, not what is actually causing it or where it's originating from, and you can only use this a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier and regain all expended uses when finishing a long rest. Finally, at 17th level, you gain the Eye for Weakness feature, which lets you add an extra 3d6 sneak attack damage to a creature that's affected by your Insightful Fighting feature, which is an excellent increase in damage against a specific target. In terms of raw abilities and features you get with the subclass, you definitely get a lot of useful tools that can help your experience as an Inquisitive Rogue. But the biggest problem the subclass faces is the fact that a lot of its features are just too niche for most campaigns. In a combat-light setting, the Inquisitive Rogue has the potential to be one of the most powerful subclasses, simply due to how well they are at investigating people and places. However, since D&D 5e focuses more on combat most of the time, there aren't very many things that an Inquisitive Rogue has an edge on. While Insightful Fighting allows you to use your sneak attack feature against a creature even if they don't have advantage on it, it wouldn't really be useful for 2 reasons. The first reason is the fact that you can also proc sneak attacks on allies within 5 feet of your target, which tends to happen very often to begin with. And the second reason is due to an optional feature included later in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Steady Aim, which allows you to use your bonus action and forgo all of your movement speed for the turn in order to gain advantage on your attack roll, with the added caveat that you must not have already moved on your turn to use this feature. This basically meant that you could always use your sneak attack as long as you were comfortable not moving from a spot and have a higher chance to hit than you would normally with Insightful Fighting. And while you do gain the extra 3d6 sneak attack damage from your Eye for Weakness on the target that's under the effect of your Insightful Fighting feature, you have to wait until 17th level before you can use it. Overall, this subclass does have some good roleplay potential, as all the non-combat features are actually quite good. However, if your campaign ends up being combat heavy, you might find this subclass a bit lacking in that department. And at number 8 on this list, we have the Oathbreaker Paladin. This subclass gives the Paladin class a range of options that are supposed to cater towards those that have chosen to break their oath in order to pursue a darker and more evil path, according to the flavor text. However, this isn't always the case, and can usually be changed to fit a character that may have just fallen out of favor with their oath. Unfortunately, the features and spells learned from the Oathbreaker subclass would still only reflect a darker and sinister character either way. As for what you learn when you take the subclass at their level, the first thing you'll learn are new spells that you would gain at appropriate levels, which are quite good. For example, Inflict Wounds is a first level spell that deals 3d10 necrotic damage to a creature you hit within 10 feet of you, while Hellish Rebuke allows you to use a reaction when taking any damage from a creature within 60 feet of you in order to deal 2d10 fire damage to the attacked creature. You can also learn Animate Dead at 9th level in order to animate corpses to serve you, which can be important due to some of your subclass features you learn as an Oathbreaker. Along the extra spells, at 3rd level you gain the Channel Divinity feature that, like all paladins, have special effects tied to whatever subclass you picked at this level. For Oathbreakers, they may choose between 2 different effects. The first effect, Control Undead, allows the paladin to use their action in order to force an undead creature whose challenge rating, or CR, is lower than the paladin's level, and also within 30 feet of them, to make a successful wisdom saving throw or fall under the effect of the paladin for the next 24 hours, or until they use the Channel Divinity option again. And there are quite a few undead creatures you can control with this feature that can be quite terrifying to have under your command, such as a Tyrannosaurus zombie or even a Mummy Lord, for example. Meanwhile, the second option you have for the Channel Divinity, Dreadful Aspect, allows you to use your action in order to inflict creatures you choose within 30 feet of you to fail a wisdom saving throw with the frightened condition for 1 minute, making it so that those creatures have disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks while the paladin is in their line of sight, while also preventing any creatures from willingly moving towards their source of fear. And creatures frightened this way actually cannot roll another wisdom saving throw, like most other effects, in order to remove the condition. Instead, creatures that are frightened by the paladin with Dreadful Aspect must first end its turn more than 30 feet away from their source of fear if they want to make further saving throw attempts to try to shake being frightened. At 7th level, you gain the Aura of Hate feature, allowing you and any fiends and undead within 10 feet of you to gain a bonus to your melee weapon damage rolls equal to your charisma modifier, but no less than a +1 bonus. And then at 18th level, the aura increases to 30 feet. While this feature is excellent at increasing the amount of damage you can do as a paladin, the biggest downside of this feature is the fact that it doesn't discriminate when it comes to the kinds of fiends and undeads that get the damage boost. So if you're in a very undead heavy campaign, you would only be making things harder for yourself and your allies. Most of the time though, you should be fine, and this benefit should only really affect you if you play things right. Also, if you've animated a hefty sum of undead over the past few days, they would all be able to benefit from this extra damage, which could be a very nice bonus to damage. Moving on to the Oathbreaker's 15th level features, we have Supernatural Resistance. All this does is give you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons, which isn't terrible, but means creatures with magical weapon traits such as Balors, Pit Fiends, and pretty much every golem will ignore your resistances. And like every other paladin subclass, the Oathbreaker also comes with a 20th level capstone feature. For them, they gain the Dreadlord feature, allowing them to surround themselves in a gloomy aura for 1 minute, granting special bonuses. All bright light in a 30-foot radius of yourself gets reduced to dim light, and whenever a creature starts its turn inside the aura and is frightened, they take 4d10 psychic damage. In addition to this, the paladin and creatures they choose can become draped in shadow, forcing creatures that rely on sight to have disadvantage on attack rolls against them. And lastly, this aura gives the paladin a bonus action that they can use in order to make a melee attack against a creature that is inside the aura, dealing 3d10 plus the paladin's charisma modifier necrotic damage if it hits. On paper, this feature seems very good. Dealing 4d10 psychic damage to a frightened creature is very nice. However, the reliance on being frightened can be kind of a hindrance for this feature, due to the fact you would only have one chance per long or short rest to inflict the frightened condition with your Channel Divinity, unless you have another way to use your Channel Divinity feature twice, such as through the use of the Amulet of Devout magical item, which not only allows you to use one of your Channel Divinity features without expending it, but also increases the spell attack roll and saving DCs of your spells, which is also extremely useful, considering that paladins tend to be spread out more and might not be able to max out their spellcasting stat, depending on what you might be going for. Unfortunately, this bonus only applies to the paladin's spellcasting and not their Channel Divinity feature, so you can't use this magical item to make it easier to frighten creatures. Wrathful Smite is also another good way to inflict a frightened condition on a creature, since that creature would have disadvantage on the wisdom check they'd have to make to try to end the effect due to being frightened in the first place. But if creatures happen to be immune to being frightened, then you're kind of out of luck with this part of the feature. As for being able to grant your allies within 30 feet of you a defensive buff by imposing disadvantage on attack rolls against them, this is a very solid feature for the most part, with the only downside being that it doesn't work on creatures that have blind sight. As for the bonus action part of this feature, being able to effectively cast a free inflict wound spell every turn as a bonus action is pretty good. But since your Divine Smite feature requires a weapon attack roll and not a spell attack roll in order to work, you can't really gas it up with more damage if you really wanted to. But free damage as a bonus action is still very solid regardless. Overall, there is a lot of potential with Oathbreaker, but it sadly doesn't really do anything that other classes can just do better. If you really want to run an Oathbreaker as a Necromancer, then you're better off running a Necromancy Wizard, since their 6th level feature, Undead Thralls, not only allows your Animate Dead spell to raise an extra body, but also grants them extra hit points equal to your Wizard level, and bonus damage equal to your Proficiency bonus. Necromancy Wizards also have access to the 5th level spell, Dance Macabre. which can animate up to 5 corpses that also gain a bonus to the attack rolls and damage rolls equal to your intelligence modifier, which are all further buffed by your Undead Thralls features too. To put this into perspective, a normal skeleton that's been animated only has a +2 bonus to hit normally, and deals 1d6 plus 2 damage when it does hit, which is pretty inaccurate. But the beauty of being able to animate a lot of corpses is being able to create a small army. And as long as you have enough spell slots each day to reassert control over your current undead companions, you can just create more since Animate Undead doesn't require you to concentrate on the spell. So what ends up happening is you eventually have 10 plus skeletons making individual attacks against creatures, meaning some of them are bound to hit something, whether it's because of a lucky high roll or a critical hit. And even if 3 out of those 10 skeletons hit their mark, that's an average of 16 damage they just dealt at the cost of your bonus action. And if we're assuming you're 9th level, since this is the earliest you can gain access to Dance Macabre, your damage of your skeletons would become 1d6 plus 6 due to your Undead Thralls features granted them +4 bonus because of your proficiency modifier, which averages to around 28 damage if the same 3 skeletons hit. And if you were to use Dance Macabre in order to raise 5 skeletons and have them attack instead, then if we were to assume your intelligence is maxed out by this point, these skeletons would have a +7 to their chance to hit, which would deal 1d6 plus 11 damage with each hit. Not only are these skeletons more likely to hit now, they would also just deal a whole lot of flat damage this way as well. And if 3 out of these 5 skeletons were to hit, that would be an average of 43 damage at the cost of a single bonus action. Meanwhile, the Oathbreaker Paladin doesn't get the buffed version of Animate Dead and only provides a damage bonus to the already inaccurate skeletons or zombies they do animate. On the other hand, being able to grant a damage bonus to an enslaved undead with your channel divinity, which is pretty good since some creatures do come with multi-attack features, which Oathbreaker does have over Necromancy Wizard, since Undead Thralls only works on undead you've created with Necromancy spells, which does not apply to an undead you enslave with the Necromancy Wizard's 14th level feature, Command Undead, which works similarly to the Control Undead Channel Divinity feature, except it has a few more stipulations that are taken into account, such as the undead creature's intelligence stat. Basically, any undead creature with an intelligence stat of 12 or higher can repeat the Charisma saving throw of this feature once every hour to try to break free of it, while a creature with intelligence stat of 11 or lower that fails the check is permanently under your control until you use the feature again. There also isn't a challenge rating limit on Command Dead, meaning you could theoretically control a Nightwalker, which has an intelligence stat of 6 and is a CR 20 undead with some really terrifying abilities, like Life Eater, which makes it so that a creature can't be revived except by a wish spell if it reduces the creature's hit points to 0, or even Finger of Doom, which frightens and paralyzes creatures that fail a wisdom saving throw against it. The Nightwalker also has a 30-foot aura that just deals 66 necrotic damage every turn to any creatures inside of it, including you and your teammates, and can reduce the max amount of hit points of creatures with its enervating focus. So while both of these subclass features have ways to control and enhance the abilities of undead creatures, Necromancy Wizards definitely do a better job at being necromancers, which isn't very surprising given their namesake. As for the reason why Oathbreaker takes number 8 spot on this list, it's because the Oathbreaker Paladin can only be found in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is usually only reserved for the DM. Essentially, the Oathbreaker Paladin is more meant to be played by a character that is antagonistic towards the party, and would naturally have fiends and undead thralls at their command in order to comfortably and safely benefit from the Oathbreaker's class features without providing an inherent downside to their allies, which actually makes the subclass really good. So while technically the Oathbreaker isn't really meant as a player class to begin with, you can still make an Oathbreaker player character, which is what is being judged and why it makes this list.